And the season rolls right along. Welcome to week number 6 of Behind the Point Spread, brought to you by Doc Talk Sports. I'm Travis Justice. I'm going to be joined by Dr. Rob Zatechka and Scott Spreitzer momentarily. But please keep in mind, this is an interactive show. It's just not three dudes talking about college football and the National Football League. We want to hear what you have to say. So on the comments section, especially if you're using Facebook or YouTube, you can write your comment or question in there, and we'll try to get to it. Or better yet, you can also give us a call at 402-593-5556. That's 402-593-5556. Good to have you along on a Wednesday night. Let's bring in Scott Spreitzer and Dr. Rob Zatechka. Hello, gentlemen.
How's it going?
Well, you know what? I'm in a good mood because, Rob, you'll notice I got a new shirt on. Rob sees me a lot more than Scott does, right? My wife got back from New Orleans tonight. So she was in New Orleans. And for how much we talk about craft beer on our podcast, this is Ecology. And it's a new brewery down by the Superdome. My daughter works there, but it's a really, really cool shirt. And so tonight's Behind the Point Spread brought to you by Ecology Brewing in New Orleans. So if you go to New Orleans, this is where you got to go.
It's really very cool. Nice. I love it.
Yeah. Because it's like the first time ever my wife has ever brought me back a gift from vacation. Because when I go out of town, I don't bring her shit. I just like pick me up, and then she brought me back. So now I got to get her stuff when I go out of town. So
well, what is it? The Super Bowl coming up is back in New Orleans. So there you go. We got a place to go and talk about.
You know what's amazing about that? I mean, and I know that's there because it's New Orleans, right? But I do believe the Superdome's starting to show its age. It's like only in New Orleans would a stadium that old still get to host the Super Bowl, right? I mean, because now you got Vegas, you got Los Angeles, you got all these really cool stadiums, but very few of those cities match the culture and the party atmosphere of New Orleans. Now, Vegas can party, I get it, but it's my daughter's graduation, Abigail's graduation was at the Superdome. She went to school in New Orleans. I remember walking in there going, man, this place needs a bit of an update.
Well, I was going to say, have they done much updating? I mean, they had to have completely redone it after Katrina, I thought.
Well, Katrina got some major ones, but it's kind of like Memorial Stadium, right, Rob? You're just polishing a turd. I mean, at the end of the day.
Oh,
and I mean that.
Damn.
I'm not calling Memorial Stadium a turd, but it doesn't matter what you do. You're putting lipstick on a pig. The more you just kind of renovate, and it is what it is.
Travis, what did you back there? I think it was 07 or 08 when I came back. You talked me into coming back for a Missouri-Nebraska Coach Callahan game. I brought my wife, I brought my daughter, I brought my sister, and it was the first time I'd been to a game, obviously, since the early 80s. And I know what you're talking about. It was funny because my wife watches Nebraska games with her when I'm watching them on TV. And she sees this beautiful stadium. And then she goes there and she was like, what's up with the bathrooms? after she walked. Now, that was 17 years ago. Maybe they've upgraded, but I get what you're saying.
No, they haven't. They haven't. They're getting ready to spend like $500,000 or $500 million, but they still haven't updated them. Okay, let me give a better example outside. Wrigley Field's a dump. It is. It is a dump. Yeah. Fenway Park, they're classic. They're historic. I appreciate them. But you can still say it's a dump, right?
Yes.
Now, Brian Huskey's already mad at me. You called it a turd. No, I did not. I used the expression, it's like polishing a turd. I did not. So just, hey, before we dive into
it's an old structure.
Yes.
Wait, what was Wyatt saying there?
So this is a gambling question before we get into the games. Wyatt says, hey, does home field advantage still act as a 3-point differential when handicapping a spread?
It's kind of like the starting point, I guess. But for me, I think every home field is a little bit different. When Dr. Rob played for Nebraska, you could put on another 1.5 on that home field advantage. Last 5, 7, 8 years, it's maybe 2.5, if that, the home field advantage in Nebraska. So it does change from year to year. And it depends on who you're playing. If Nebraska plays Akron, home field advantage still means an awful lot. If Nebraska plays Ohio State, it's worth it, 0.5 point. So it's not just a blanketed, hey, it's worth 3 points, every home field advantage, and that's that. out here in Las Vegas, UNLV, even last week in the big win, top 25 rating now, they're still not getting anybody in the upper bowl at Allegiant Stadium. So they're getting 30,000 people. It's not that big of a home field advantage. The Raiders have zero home field advantage, even though it's packed. There's visitors in the stands every single week. So it really does depend how good the team is, who the opponent is, as to whether or not you give it a round of 3 or not. I hope that answers the question. So
it does. Hey, Rob, I was going to tell you because Scott wrote me earlier in the week, and our buddy down in Australia, his bet came in, right, Scott, on the Australian.
Yeah, Scott messaged
Lions
us.
won
easily. So this is a great story. So, and I had been kind of leaning toward Brisbane over Sydney, the Sydney Swans, and we're sitting there on a Friday night. I think the game started at 9:30 p.m. Pacific. They're like 18 hours ahead of us in Australia, and so just kicking back. Week's done. Now I just got to wait for the Saturday games. And so I'm like just feeling relaxed the whole thing. I flip on the game as it's getting ready to start. And by the way, Katy Perry opened the event with a little concert there. But having said that, we moved on. But I'm sitting there and I'm watching it with my daughter, who happened to be in town for the weekend from Reno. And she's like, Dad, I know you used to watch this, but I never really watched. I always thought I heard a lot of whistles. Yeah. And she goes, I like this more than American football. And I was like, no shit. So anyway, so the game's, 5 minutes into the game, it's still tied or whatever. And they have 20-minute quarters, 4 quarters. And I said to her, I go, you like here? And she goes, well, the Swans. Well, 2.5 hours later, the final score was Brisbane Lions 120, Sydney Swans 60. Now, I've won some football games, but I've never seen my team score 120 points in a 60-point win. But hats off, Rob, to your buddy in Australia who nailed the Brisbane Lions.
Hey, behind the point spread is international. The wonders of YouTube and Facebook. People are watching all over the world because for the next half hour, 35 minutes, we like to have a little bit of fun. You never know what's going to come up. And, of course, we're going to get to the National Football League and college football. Don't forget, if you want to work with Scott Spreitzer anytime during the year, you can text the word Doc Talk to the number 29022 and get a free $60 trial of the premium member picks from Scott, or visit docsports.com and sign up for the free 60 on the upper left-hand side of the website. Here are the games we're going to be looking at tonight. Got one in the National Football League, Baltimore at Cincinnati. Then we have Tennessee at Arkansas in college football, Missouri at Texas A&M, Iowa at Ohio State, and we're going to wrap things up with Rutgers and Nebraska. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, it is like a call-in radio show, but this is a call-in TV show or YouTube show. 402-543-5556. It's 402-543-5556. Now, to be fair, if you're wondering how we come up with the games, I come up with the games because Scott's a busy guy. I just text him saying, here are the games we're going to talk about. And Scott comes on tonight right before we were in our little green room. We got a green room here. And he was like, you picked really hard games. These aren't going to be on my card. I'm picking games that Scott's not even going to touch this week. So I'm putting you to the challenge.
Well, I do have at least one game that I'm involved in. So that's good. We'll talk about that. But I do have opinions on them all. And, you get a line move here or there along the way, then maybe a play does pop up in one of these games. So a couple of them are close, and we'll tell you which ones and which one I'm involved in thus far. But listen, guys, I wanted to say something real quick because we had a rough start. First 2 weeks of NFL, had a rough Saturday, the last Saturday of August. Last week, we got a sweep. It was very nice. I almost didn't play after bragging about a contest that I won a couple of years ago. I thought that's the kiss of death. So we end up 7-0 last week and 12-2 now the last 2 weeks. So we're back on track. And I'm just going to say this every week until next year. I don't need to play week 1. I never
remember
one.
Rob, let's remind him of that next year. All I hear is Godfather 3. As soon as I think I'm out, they pull me back in. It's like 7-0, baby. Like I was on the golf course today, my last drive. Beautiful. I'm like, this is why you keep coming back to play.
Exactly.
So, all right, let's dive into that very first game. It's going to be on Sunday at noon on CBS. The Ravens at the Bengals. Baltimore -3 on the road. So there's your road favorite, the over-under at 49. Scott, the Bengals won last week. They've had traditional slow starts with Zach Taylor, former Husker quarterback, as the coach. They get a couple games in and they start playing better football.
It's just the way it is under this coaching staff, as you mentioned, with Joe Burrow at quarterback. I had Cincy last week. That was one of the plays that I had in the NFL. You look at the previous games when they lost. You had 3 losses by a grand total of 12 points, a couple of plays here or there, and they could have won those games. The offense has been getting better as the receivers have been getting healthy. The defense, it's still shaky against the run. I get fed up sometimes with organizations like this that don't spend money where they need it most. And they go out and they get, really good offensive players. And then on defense, they don't spend money on anybody. So they got this shaky defense that will make sure that Cincy isn't vying for an AFC championship at the end of the year. The offense is good enough to be there, but they won't spend the money. So anyway, that's a problem for later in the year for them. I wanted to mention real quickly, by the way, I don't know if you guys saw the game itself between Baltimore and Buffalo, and not only the final score, holy cow, the yards per play margin for the Ravens last week was almost +4. I mean, that was annihilation, destruction like you don't normally see in the NFL. And we know Baltimore could very well be 4-0 right now. So since he comes in 1-3, they're not a 1-3 team. They're above average, and that record is misleading. Baltimore could be 4-0. I like the points this week with the Bengals taking the points, and shop around because there are 2.5s out there. As Travis mentioned, there's 3s. And I like them here to likely get the outright win. When it's under 6 and I'm taking an underdog, I got to think my team has a good shot to win the game outright. Of course, the Ravens were perfect on Sunday night. You don't see perfection 2 weeks in a row too often from too many teams. And I look back at those first 3 games, I was really bothered by the fact, and I make notes every game, every week, really bothered by the fact that they were extremely vulnerable in the second half of those first 3 games. They were outscored by a combined 53-31 in the second half of weeks 1 through 3. And it was every team outscoring them, all 3 teams, not just one gigantic lopsided second half. So that does bother me a bit. It means they're getting out adjusted, maybe outplayed over the final quarter and a half. And I think Cincinnati catches them this week after a near perfect game for Baltimore last Sunday night. That is, I want to say real quick, that is one of the plays, by the way, that I'm on.
You are?
Yeah.
Okay. Are both these teams playoff teams? I mean, do you think? I think Baltimore definitely is, but is Cincinnati a playoff team with a fully healthy Joe Burrow?
Baltimore's a playoff team that can go deep. Rob, as far as Cincy, I just think their defense is going to cost them some big game down the road because they won't spend money on star defenders. And when they find one, as soon as his contract is up for negotiation, he goes somewhere else because the Bengals won't pluck down the money.
When you look at a team like the Bengals, you made the comment earlier that they're an above average team. They're not a 1-3 team or a 1-3 roster. When you see a team like this that has a rough start, I mean, do you take into account, is there they're due for a win? Does that play into your thinking when you're handicapping these?
Kind of when they're a team like Cincy with that kind of offensive talent and that kind of success that they've had when Burrow's been healthy since he's been in the league, kind of comes up that they're due, but eventually 90% of it's going to break down to the spot they're in and all the metrics that I use. But it does, you think, okay, this is like going to last week. They're playing Carolina. You're like, this is the spot. This team finally gets it together, turns it on, has a good offensive game, and will win a game that they've really got to play their best to go out and win. They can't start 0-4. So it does come into it a little bit. For me, it's a situation where that's kind of an initial thought, and then I like to see if the metrics fit that initial thought.
All right, let's move on to the college game now, shall we? We could do a lot of NFL, but we choose to do a lot more college football here. It's Rocky Top going to Pig Suey. Saturday night, 6:30 on ABC. Tennessee on the road, a 13.5-point favorite. The over-under at 58.5. Again, we're going to have lines that may differ because Scott looks at 100 different sports books. I go online right before we go on the show and say, okay, this is where I got the line. So we may have a half a point or a point off somewhere, but this is in the general vicinity. But Tennessee is rolling, man, absolutely rolling.
Well, and like that Baltimore line, that was 2.5 and 3. You're right. With the line you put up there, there's probably 25% of the books that had it at 3 and probably 75% at 2.5. But yeah, you know what? I pay money for a line service every month. No, I pay it by the year, but you can pay every month. And that line service gives me access to about 50 books around the world, of which I probably have 18 to 20 on my screen at all times, the really good books. I have a couple of outliers that are horrible line makers, and you wish you could take advantage of it, but you can't always do it. But it lets you kind of know where the public is, where the sharp money is. So this line is basically 13 and a half just about everywhere. I did see a couple of 14s popping up earlier on a Wednesday. They opened Tennessee as low as 11 here in Las Vegas. Arkansas is a tough out. We saw them lose to Oak State on the road in overtime. They lost to A&M 21-17. They actually outgained A&M by about 80 yards. The problem was turnovers for this team. They finished with a -3 turnover margin against A&M and lose by 4. They absolutely crushed Oklahoma State statistically. Outgained them almost, well, not quite 2-1, but not that far off. They had about 7 yards per play. Cowboys had less than 5 yards per play, but they had 4 turnovers and a -3 turnover margin in that game. So now you got all these injuries on top of a team that has a propensity to commit a lot of turnovers. And as much as I want to jump in on Arkansas here, I can't because of that. So my lean is to Arkansas, but I haven't pulled my wallet out and made that bet because I don't like a team that's not only turning the ball over every single game where they have a step-up opponent, and we're talking multiple, 7 turnovers in those 2 games, and now they've just got a mess of injuries. And that's why this number went from 11 to as high as 14 on Tennessee because, it's just a situation where those injuries are starting to mount.
It's like Nebraska the last couple of years with all the turnovers.
Yeah. I got a question for you. I took a look at the Sagarin ratings today, and Rob, I'd love to hear your opinion on this too. I took a look at in the conference Sagarin ratings had the SEC number 1, the Big 12 number 2, and the Big 10 number 3. Now, do you agree with that, or is that going to? And I know it's going to fluctuate with computer models and stuff like that, but right now the Big 12 is a higher rated conference than the Big 10. SEC number 1. It's on the Sagarin ratings. That surprise you?
I mean, I think the Sagarin ratings have gotten better over the years. I mean, you go back 20, 30 years ago, I thought they were horrible. I mean, they were almost, I didn't think they were very accurate, and I always thought that they were kind of, I don't know, they just never seemed right to me.
I get,
and I even remember the old BCS, and they were part of the formula for the BCS. And I always thought they were one of the least accurate when you looked at where they had teams. I always thought they were the ones that if somebody was going to get left out who should have been in, it was usually due to the Sagarin ratings.
Let me rephrase the question. Is the perception always the reality? I mean, we've always perceived the SEC and the Big 10 being the best conferences. And I would say historically they are. But when you kind of look at this, Scott, I mean, when you do your handicapping, do you look at conferences as a whole or just do an individual team? I mean, how do you view the conferences right now?
Yeah, I do them, individual teams, but I'm going to my notes here of my updated ratings that I did the other day after the games. And just to let you know how everything stands here, like you look at I don't break them down by who's the better conference, but this might be a way that you can kind of think that way. I'm looking at my ratings right now for teams. The Big 10 has, in my ratings, power ratings, 4 teams in the top 12. The best Big 12 rating I have, Iowa State at number 14, Kansas State at number 17. But when you look at the depth of the conference, the Big 10 has UCLA. The Big 10 has Purdue. Those are teams outside my top 75. The Big 12 has 1 team that I have rated outside the top 60, and that's the Houston Cougars. Everybody else is in the top 60. So you've got the Big 10 who has the better top tier teams and the Big 12 who has the better lower tier teams. And then they're all kind of mixed up in between. So I would rate them overall. I would say slightly Big 10 better than the Big 12, but it's not that far off because, again, the Big 12 doesn't drop off a cliff with the final 3 or 4 teams in the conference like the Big 10 does in my power ratings.
Makes a lot of sense. So let's keep everything going in the SEC. MIZZOU at Giggle. You got. I'm going all geeky tonight on college football. You've got Texas A&M, the Missouri. Call me crazy. I never thought Missouri was going to be successful when they went to the SEC. I could never figure it out. I was like, what are they doing? There's no way they're going to compete. This team's pretty freaking good.
Well, their first year, I mean, their first couple of years, they were competing for SEC titles.
I know, and I didn't think that was going to be possible.
Well, and that was a while ago. I mean, they kind of had sort of a middle era there that was pretty mediocre. And I mean, even Drinkowitz's first couple of years were a little sketchy. Yeah. I mean, the last 2 seasons now they've been way up there, and I think it's kind of it's a little bit of a different animal. The thing is, though, when they made the move, and again, this is kind of getting away from the here and now of Missouri, but I think when Missouri made that move, I think they were looking, okay, I don't think they felt like the Big 12 was going to be a very, I mean, there were chunks of time there. I thought the Big 12 was going to go the way of the Pac-12. Now, this is 10, 15 years ago.
You're not alone there, Rob.
Yeah, but I mean, in that time period where Colorado left, then Nebraska and Missouri left, A&M left. I mean, when those schools left, all of a sudden, it kind of turned the Big 12 kind of turned into sort of outside of Oklahoma and Texas, they were sort of the island of misfit toys. And then they just started adding. They just started adding anybody and everybody. It's hey, you need a spot, we got a spot for you. But I think Missouri looked at it. I mean, historically, Missouri wanted to go to the Big Ten, was my understanding.
And you know why they didn't get? You know why they didn't get to go to the Big Ten? Because they kept asking to be in the Big Ten. The Big Ten is kind of like the secret society at Harvard, and you wait to get asked to be in that league, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I think part of it too is I don't think the Big Ten felt like it brought anything.
That's fair.
I mean, you've got. I mean, it's one of those. Nebraska. It's one of those. Wow, is that Omaha television market really all that great? It's like no.
I was on TV in Omaha. That showed you how not great it was.
Yeah, that's pretty good. No, but it's Nebraska brings it. It still has national marketing recognition. It has brand recognition, and I mean, you can rip on Nebraska all you want. And yes, it's been a pretty mediocre program, but it still has this brand recognition that gets TV ratings on a national basis. And that's where the value lies with Nebraska. And that's where the value was in terms of being able to get into the Big Ten. But I mean, it's kind of one of those things. I think if you really went to any team over the last 25 years. And I mean, let me rephrase this. If you went to any Big 12 team over the last 25 years and said, hey, it's the Big 10 or it's the SEC knocking, and they've got an invite for you, are you turning it down?
No, not one of them would.
You're getting the hell out of there. And guess what? Everybody who's been able to get out has gotten out of there. I mean, Colorado's the lone team that got out and came back specifically because the Pac-12 imploded. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those things. I think when you ask that question, like what were they thinking going to the SEC? They had a chance to go to the SEC and they took it.
Well, because I think they thought the Big 12 was going to implode. I mean, it was like, get that, Colorado out, Missouri out, Nebraska out. You got to jump ship. So, what do you think about this game, Scott? As we just went on a little rant. That's what we do. We just kind of just go off tangents. We have ADHD. We start chasing stuff and just start having random conversations.
Yeah, all I'm going to throw into that is that if Peacock won subscriptions, do they put Nebraska on Peacock that week or do they put Missouri on? And that's kind of falling in line with what you were saying about the brand that Nebraska has, and they still do. Out here, they're inflated with most of their lines, Nebraska, when they're favored because they're still a brand. People can love them or hate them. They want to talk Nebraska football, whether they're rooting for them or against them. And it's still that way, which is pretty crazy. But Missouri and A&M, yeah, A&M laying a couple of points here, total sitting around 49. I don't think A&M's looked all that great this season, and I bet a lot of viewers feel the same way. They were completely shut down by Notre Dame in that opener. They were so-so in a close win over Bowling Green. The Falcons, not a bad team, and got outgained by 80 yards or so in a 4-point win over Arkansas, but we're benefiting from all those Razorback turnovers. The one thing about A&M, though, it's not so much luck. I mean, they do force turnovers. They get after the football when they have a chance, and they don't make costly mistakes when they're on offense. But if you shut down the ground game a la Notre Dame, you can beat this football team. You can put them behind the 8 ball. So Missouri's defense has been outstanding. The offense is balanced. Boston College and Vanderbilt were both close calls. Vanderbilt was closer than it should have been, but the Commodores are playing a decent brand of football, and they're well coached. We know BC is extremely well coached and playing well this year. The defenses for these two teams are going to be the best defenses that the two offenses have faced all season long. A&M only gave up to 23 to Dame, and it was a little misleading because they were at 16 for a while, the Irish. They held their other 4 opponents to under 20 points apiece. Mizzou comes in 3rd, 5th, 19th in total yards, passing yards, and rushing yards allowed per game. I think this game stays, well, it's down to 48.5. It's been as high as 50 in some spots. I think it's moved in the right direction. I think it's a lower scoring game. It gets a little iffy sometimes because you do have an A&M team that knows how to force turnovers. You always fear giving up a short field situation for an opposing offense or your own offense if the defense forces turnovers, but got to put that aside and say that I think this game stays under the total.
If you're watching on YouTube now, right now, you're watching something fun because Rob and Scott can't see the comment section. Or maybe you can, and you're not following. But there's like a fight going on in YouTube right now. I think you got a Missouri fan and a Nebraska fan going on it. All of a sudden, I start seeing stuff. What about the Kansas City mob? What about the St. Louis mob? Kansas City mob's 1924, but the St. Louis mob's more badass. I mean, there's like this argument of what's going on in Missouri, right? And they're like, what does it have to offer? The Ozarks? Because they're talking about NIL money. Now Warren Buffett now is getting drawn into this thing. So it is the stuff you never think you're going to see. Really. I mean, it's just an argument that's taking place, and it's kind of fun to watch. It's like just sitting back and enjoying it.
Well, when you started saying the mob, KC and St. Louis, I was going to say respect to KC, but we got you all beat by 8 touchdowns out here in Vegas.
And if you're going to bring in city mobs, let's not forget about the Omaha mob, right? I mean, sometimes Spreitzer, you had to be a little. Were you connected? Were you connected at all?
The fifth keeps coming into my mind for some reason. No. Well, if connected means you knew a lot of bettors and you knew a lot of bookies from the time you were old enough to walk, because of your dad, then yeah. But listen, there's a plaque in the Mob Museum out here in Vegas that talks about sports betting in the state of Nebraska, and it's a small little plaque. I got to took a photo of it a couple of years ago. That's been the big thing out here is they're like, we don't think the bookies in Nebraska really want to have legal betting because it puts them out of work in a lot of spots. Now, I'm just going to say, and I would never recommend this to anybody, that you always keep a Ma and Pa shop around because sometimes you get better numbers.
Oh, my buddy runs a Ma and Pa shop.
There you go. Because
I asked him, Rob, you know him. Let's just call him Kelly. But anyway, we can. He's like, he's busier than ever. Rob, because he knows what I'm talking about. But he's like, you know what? Because you run the mom and pop shop. I said, how do you stay open? He's like, because I don't demand payment till Tuesday, and I don't pay till Tuesday. With the apps, you got to pre-deposit, and you're paying right away. So I mean,
always been that way too. Tuesdays, yeah. Tuesdays was always pay up or get paid. And, I can remember back in the day, I'm sure the picture is long since gone, but I told you guys before, we won't bore anybody with this too much here, but I used to sit at my kitchen table when I was 7, 8 years old. I could not wait for Tuesday night because when my dad got home, he worked for Burlington Northern Gibson Yard down in South Omaha. And so when he got home that night, I know he was bringing the sheets with all the betting numbers. And I was like a little kid at Christmas every Tuesday night during football season, and I would look at those sheets and I'm going through the sheets and I'm doing my homework at 7, 8 years old. I mean, this has been a lifelong obsession. And I always liked numbers. I always liked math, all that stuff. So it kind of made sense to me. And I used to get calls from my uncles back home. You guys ever heard of Duffy Construction?
No.
Okay. Well, they've been around
before my time.
I think they're still around 60, 70 years. Anyway, my uncles started that, and they would go down to what used to be, I don't know if it's still called this, a Ramada Inn in Bellevue, Nebraska in the early 80s. And this was before Douglas County had cable or had whatever was the USA Network back then, where you used to get like Monday night hockey. So they would rent a room in Bellevue. I don't know what it's called now. It's probably not the Ramada Inn anymore. But they would call me up about 2 hours before they'd head down to Bellevue. They lived up in Omaha. And I was 8, 9, 10 years old. My mom would answer the phone. Hey, Bob, what, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, put the kid on the phone. Hey, man, we're watching the Islanders-Rangers game tonight. What do you think? Do you have any plays for us? I mean, it was like way back then. And they would invite me to the hotel to watch the games with them. I'm 9, 10 years old. A few times I went, a couple of other times, and my mom was like, I think you better stay home tonight. They've had a few. Those kind of things.
The contrast of two people here, both extremely smart gentlemen you're listening to right now, and Dr. Rob and Scott, both pretty good at math, both probably got really high ACTs. One aspired to be a doctor. The other said, let me hold my beer. Just hold my beer.
I'm just thinking about this. You're talking about doing this when you're like 7, 8 years old. And I'm like, when I was like 8 years old, I was still learning that, like, don't eat crayons.
All right.
Like Scott's working betting lines. I'm still just learning to color within the lines.
That's great.
Let's go into the Big Ten. This is going to be a game I'm going to be watching 2:30 on CBS, Iowa and Ohio State. This opened up, I think about a 23, 24-point favorite for Ohio State. The lines dropped down to 20.5, over under 44.5. Scott, I don't see any way Iowa wins this thing, or even covers this thing. I don't.
I think you guys are going to be surprised that number is down to 19.5 at a lot of shops in Las Vegas as of this afternoon, Wednesday afternoon. And that total's got up a point, but the side is all the way down to 19.5 on the Bengals. Guess who's on the Buckeyes to go along with the Bengals? Not a parlay. Don't want to get anybody confused. But it's a situation where I got to back Ohio State at this number. You mentioned that's what it was when it opened. The Buckeyes are 51-0 at home against unranked opponents. So pretty sure they're not going to lose outright, right? And now you look at Iowa, they've lost 7 in a row against the spread to ranked teams. They lost those 7 games by an average of about 4 touchdowns per game. And if you look at last season, for instance, 0-3 against ranked teams, they got outscored 92-0. 35-0 as a 4.5-point dog to Tennessee, wow. 26-0 as a 21-point dog to Michigan, 31-0 as a 14-point dog to Penn State. That's last year's results. To me, the defense isn't as good as last season, just a smidge off of last season. The offense is a little better, but not that much because they can't run the football. 124. No. What's that? I mean, can't pass the football.
Yeah, I was going to say, they run the football well.
No, you're right. Yeah, my mistake. I meant to say can't pass the football. They're 124th in passing yards per game. Here's McNamara's numbers against the 2 step-up games, Iowa State and Minnesota. 24 for 48, 161 yards, 3.35 yards per pass, 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. So my thought on this is, do you want to bet a one-dimensional offense against Ohio State? The anti-Ohio State argument is they haven't played anyone of yet. No, they haven't. You're right. They've not played anyone of note going into this game. But it's not like this is their first rodeo as being a team that blows out other teams that all of a sudden went from unranked to being a top 5 team or a national title contender. This is what they do. So I think with that number down to 19.5, it's got to be Ohio State or nothing. If Iowa somehow holds, let's say, the Buckeyes to 31 and manages to score 13 points themselves, I'll take my shot. And if I lose, I lose. But at 19.5, I told myself anything less than 21, I'm backing the Buckeyes this week. Not a top play, but a play.
He brings up Cade McNamara, and he's taking a lot of heat in Iowa City now because of the way he throws the football. They're looking for something, and he's unconventional. Does he use the laces? Use the laces. Yeah, he'll go thumb on a lace.
That was kind of an
interesting.
That was kind of an interesting article.
Yeah, I mean, but I remember. I'm going to bring back if you're from Nebraska, specifically Omaha, and you're listening to this. Quincy Watts was the quarterback at UNO when Pat Burns and Lance Leipold, where they were taking the Mavs to the Division II playoffs. Quincy, I did a story when I was on Fox 42. Quincy Watts never threw with the laces, ever. He hated throwing with the laces. So, I mean, does it really matter, or is it a myth?
I think it depends on the player. If you're somebody who isn't bothered by not having the laces on your fingers, no big deal. So, which I don't know. This game, I thought this was the one game that I looked at where the line really surprised me, because I'm sitting here thinking, God, Iowa's going to come out. They're going to try and control the clock with that ground game. I do think Ohio State's a pretty amazing team. It just, are they going to have the ball long enough against a very good Iowa? I get it. It's not the Iowa defense of the last couple of years, but it's still a really good defense.
And Scott, I agree with you. The defense isn't as good. However, up front, linebacker, just as good. It's the defensive backfield that's really taken a step back for Iowa this year.
No, you're right. And one of the arguments also against Ohio State is it's kind of like, have they really not shown anything because of who they've played, and they've got another gear, a fifth gear to kick it into in the Big Ten? Or have we seen Ohio State and everything they have? And I think we haven't seen everything Ohio State has because they haven't had to show it. Now, again, it's what Rob said. If Iowa can run for 3.6 yards per carry, let's say, they don't have to go 5 yards per pop. If they can run enough to string together some first downs from time to time, keep the Buckeyes off the field, again, they could hold Ohio State to 31 and cover this number, lose 31-16, 31-14, somewhere in that neighborhood. But again, it's one of those things where if you think they have that ability, do you really want to jump in and take any points against Ohio State? You just leave it alone, as far as I'm concerned. Because there's 60 games.
That seems like a smart move.
Yeah. And so it's like, if I'm going to bet this game, it's the Buckeyes or nothing. And again, if you don't think that Ohio State has another gear, then you just leave the game alone. You take a few notes during the course of the game. You make your decision, your power rating adjustments for the next week.
Okay, but thanks to Rob Zatechka, and if you follow him on Twitter, at Doc Talk Sports, we learned that Ohio State may have the greatest concession stand in America.
Bacon.
They have a bacon vending machine.
Why not?
Why? Exactly. Why not?
Any bacon margaritas? That's what I want to know. Any bacon margaritas or
chocolate-covered bacon, whatever.
Just put in a beer vending machine and a bacon vending machine. You got everything a fan needs right there.
Rob, I want to take you up to Des Moines and have you meet my buddy Brooks Reynolds, who runs the Blue Ribbon Bacon Festival in Iceland, Japan, Des Moines, and Keystone. I think you would like it. And I'd like to take you to Berkwood Farms, which is all Berkshire hogs, which is like the best of the best. I think you would
like swine.
All right. You and I can go on a little road trip. A lot of people are going to be road tripping to Lincoln on Saturday because that's when Rutgers comes down. Unbeaten Rutgers. That's right. Unbeaten Rutgers takes on Nebraska. Huskers 7.5-point favorites. The over-under at 41.5. This is a 3:00 game on FS1.
And if you like Nebraska, you can get this as low as 7 right now. So a couple of 6.5s popped up, but everybody basically has gone back up with this one. So there are some out there if you like Nebraska. I told you at the top of the show I had Rutgers last week, and it was a fortunate win on Friday night against Washington. Huskies missed 3 field goals. Final difference in the final score was 3 points, 21-18. Ethan Kaliakmanis, he played well, and I saw a lot of RPO stuff against Washington. Washington likes to play that, what do you call it, the bear front on defense. And the RPOs kind of eventually took Washington out of that a little bit. Altmaier did that against Nebraska. He did it well. I think we got a very physical game. Rutgers is going to run, Monongai right at the Husker defense, see if Nebraska can stop them. Illinois was able to get the job done doing that. And I think Rutgers will attempt to do the same. I also think defensively, they're going to go a lot of zone. They're not a team that always does that, but I think they're going to see a lot of zone this week, Nebraska, and see if Dylan Raiola can handle it. We saw Illinois play more zone than they normally do against the Huskers. But here's the thing. Rutgers got outgained by more than 220 yards last week against Washington. They gave up 8 yards per play. They gave up 207 yards rushing on 7 yards per carry. I mean, UW lit them up on the ground and through the air. And when you go back to the 3-point win over Virginia Tech, Rutgers allowed 183 rushing yards on almost 7 yards per pop. So that's 2 games now in their step-up games where they've given up 7 yards per carry in each of those games. Again, Washington probably should have won that game. Virginia Tech committed 3 turnovers, only lost the game by 3. So Rutgers has been fortunate. They're 99th against the run. They're 97th against the pass. And 2 other games that, figure into these statistics came against Howard and Akron. So you look at Rutgers, they gained less than 4 yards per carry combined against UW and against Virginia Tech. And again, they allowed those teams to run up and down the field. If Nebraska is able to deny Rutgers the run, they can win this football game by more than that 7. I also want to see, Raiola have a strong game against a zone-looking defense. They won't play it. They probably will play it more than Illinois did, but I thought Raiola looked pretty good against the zone. Young guy now in his 5th game at the collegiate level, so I think he'd be okay. I always want to take 7 or more against Nebraska if I can, if I think it's the right side. I can't get over the fact that Rutgers has been so lucky in 2 of their wins in their 2 step-up games. And I also, let me see if I jotted it down here, guys. I grabbed a note here that I think would surprise a lot of people when it comes to Schiano. Let me see if I can find it here. Or maybe I didn't write it down. I didn't write it down. Anyway, I will have to post it on Twitter later tonight. But it has to do with the way Schiano is on the road against teams with a winning record. It's not good. It's 4-14 actually against the spread. I don't have the victory margin, average victory margin in front of me. That was the note I missed, but 4-14 against the spread. I think Nebraska, the only thing that scares me about this, besides special teams and a couple of other issues, is that Nebraska is going to field all the pressure here. If they lose this football game, every bit of hype, every bit of pat on the back, you're finally back in the top 25 is out the window. Gone. It's just gone. You can't lose this game and expect to get any hype. They're going to say, same old Nebraska. It doesn't matter. Matt Rule, same old Nebraska. There's a lot of pressure on this football team this week. They're lucky they got Dylan Raiola, quarterback. No doubt about it.
You bring up the special teams. I was playing golf today with former Husker kicker Alex Henry. I tried to pick his brain, and he's like, he goes, the snap. How about this? I hope I'm not giving too much. I go, what would you do at Holden? Because some of the holds weren't great. Rob, what do you think of this? Alex goes, and I hope this wasn't an off the record conversation, but he's like, I would put Heinrich Harburg as the hold. He goes, he's got soft hands. It adds a different dimension back there to whether you can run a fake, he can run with it, he can pass with it, he can hold it. He thought Harburg should be the hold.
I think it's a genius idea. I mean, I like the idea that you got a guy that, number one, it's a guy that, I hope this sounds right. It's a guy that's used to having the ball in his hands. He's a quarterback. And then he's not playing quarterback. He's playing tight end or wide receiver or running back. It's a guy that's used to getting the ball in his hands on a consistent basis. And so there's a sure-handedness there. There's, what to do with it. And then, something goes wrong. You got somebody who could potentially make a play from that spot.
Yeah, I just thought it was an interesting conversation. And Alex, pretty darn good kicker, right? By the way, he feels no pressure. Even on the golf course, we're sitting going, you feel no pressure. And I go, well, when you kick a 58-yard Memorial Stadium to beat Colorado, and you go kick to the Eagles for like 5 or 6 years, what pressure are you going to feel, right? You're playing golf with 3 hacks. So,
what's your handicap? I got to ask you before you go on. What's your handicap?
Oh, it's like 26.
Okay, we could golf together.
Yeah, I'm really, really bad.
I played Dodge Park at a league when I was in junior high back there as a substitute in my dad's golf league, which was interesting because everybody out there was 50 years old. And then I played Spring Lake Park over and over and over in my childhood. and not too far there from, I don't even know what's still around, was it Marchio's. So familiar with some of the courses back there, but I generally, people aren't safe even by the ball wash when I'm teeing off. I've been known to hit a few ball washes, so it's
I've never golfed with Rob, so I need to. Rob and I need to get out of the course and see what that's like.
I'm ugly. I'm really ugly.
Can I say one more? I don't want to interrupt here, but I want to say something real quick about Pete Rose, if you don't mind. No. I actually, in 1996, I got a call from his producer, probably early August of 96. And he used to do that 5-day-a-week daily show. And he did Fridays from Las Vegas. He'd spend the weekend in Vegas. So every Friday was from the MGM Sportsbook. So I got to do an entire season with the Hit King in college and pro football, mostly college. We talked, talking point spreads, all that good stuff. And I remember it was towards the very end of the bowl season, getting ready for NFL playoffs. And he called me at home. And I'm a 29-year-old kid from Bellevue, Nebraska, getting a call from the freaking Hit King, first of all. So I'm on my phone. I'm like, nobody's here. Oh my God, how am I going to prove this? One of those kind of deals. And so anyway, he had to tell me, because I'm trying to get back in the good graces of Major League Baseball. I'm not going to be able to really talk point spreads anymore, man. It's been great. But I'm trying to get, the whole thing about getting in the good graces of baseball. And you know what the last thing he ever said to me was in 1996? Who do you like in the wild card round of the playoffs? So he was trying to get back in the good graces, but he was still Pete. Love him or hate this guy, okay? And I know there's reasons for both. This guy was nothing but a gentleman and an incredible dude to hang out with for 1 hour every Friday night in 1996. That's all I can say.
Well, the crazy thing is he was an all-star at 5 different positions. Yes. If he would have been in the American League, he would have been an all-star as a designated hitter. I mean, the numbers are absolutely crazy. He had demons, right? And it took him too long to apologize. What I do like, Johnny Bench said some nice things about him. Yeah. And you see people now looking back, not as the gambler, but I've seen just so many just statistics and everything like that. He's being remembered for the best baseball player that I've ever seen, and that's and he played the game differently. I mean, just totally old school. So, yeah. All right, Rob, is Mike Norvell going to get fired? Because they looked like ass against SMU. They looked horrible.
I think he gets one rebound season after this. I really do. I mean, I could be wrong, but I think he gets one more.
What do you think there, Scott?
We'll see.
Well, I was saying second to last game of the regular season, way back after week 1. And I'm going to stick with that, although I don't like to see these predictions always come true. I don't like to see coaches getting axed if they're decent guys who are out there working their butts off. So
Scott knows, though.
Yeah, well, we did last year with, or was it last year? Yeah, last year with the Wisconsin coach. But I'm going to say second to last game of the season, unless they win all but maybe one game remaining on the slate.
Yeah. I don't see that happening.
Well, I don't want it to happen, Rob, because it's been nice going against him.
I mean, I don't see them winning all but one that's left. Yeah. They're going to lose a lot more.
Yeah, that's the thing. And also, they should have lost to Cal. They were outgained by 200 and some odd yards by Cal. Cal missed a couple of field goals. So it's I don't know. I think he's gone second to last game of the season, but I like him sticking around because we've been able to make some money going against him since the bowl game. That's the only reason. Totally selfish.
Hey, if you want to work with a free $60 trial of the premium member pick from Scott, or visit DocSports.com and sign up for the free 60 on the upper left hand of the website. Gentlemen, it's always good to catch up. It just time flies. I mean, this might be one of the longest shows we've done. I always tell Scott, we're going to be respectful of your time. We're going to do 30, 35 minutes, and here we are 50 minutes into the show. So
bullshit.
We need to get you up here into a podcast. And speaking of that, go check out the podcast. You can find it on YouTube. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Have a little fun. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. And keep in mind, all 3 of us are back every Wednesday. Even though Nebraska's not playing next Saturday, we'll do another show. I'll just pick a different game. But we'll have a lot of fun. So for Dr. Rob Zatechka, for Scott Spreitzer, I'm Travis Justice. We will talk to you next week on Behind the Point Spread.